Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 10th of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Garish, with me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and we're delighted to be joined today by David Scott, bringing us northern exposure from north of the border in Scotland. A lot going on, Mike.
Yes, well, let's begin with Theresa May's article in the Torygraph. It's a Telegraph. I am determined to give our country the best possible Brexit. So, Brian, it turns out, looks like we were wrong. There is going to be Brexit after all, because she has decided that in the amendments for the leaving the European Union bill, whatever its name is, the European Union withdrawal bill, she's actually put the date of our withdrawal, our leaving, date of exit from the European Union. The United Kingdom ceases to belong to the European Union on the 30th of March 2019. So there you go.
Well, I believe this is a complete and utter lie, and that's my personal opinion.
Indeed, but well, what did Michael Heseltine say? He said fixing the date to leave the EU in law is frankly a panic measure reflecting the growing anxiety that hostility to Brexit is growing. So there's a growing anxiety. He says that hostility to Brexit is growing. I don't think so. I think fixing the date in law is a panic measure reflecting the growing anxiety that more and more people are aware that Brexit isn't going to happen at all.
Absolutely. 17 million people, of course, voted, and those people just totally rejected by Theresa May and the Conservative government. They voted the wrong way. They need correcting.
Well, let's look at the elephant in the room. Now, earlier in the week, we were talking about the NATO defence ministers meeting, and we said that Jens Stoltenberg had said that NATO was going to have to restructure itself. It was going to create 2 new command and control centres, and as well as that, we were going to need civilian cooperation within Europe to make sure that we could move troops and equipment across Europe without having any customs hurdles and this kind of thing. Here's what Stoltenberg had to say. We need civilian government cooperation and to overcome administrative hurdles such as customs rules. Well, the Russians have jumped on this, and Alexander Grushko here saying that although NATO has been justifying its measures to overhaul its military potential, we cannot help noticing that all these efforts are focused on countering Russia. But are they? So perhaps there's a bit of deception going on. Let's have a look at Jens Stoltenberg's comments at the press conference earlier this week. Let's have a look at this and then we'll comment on it.
Stefan Leifert, German television, ZDF. Another question on the new NATO command structure. Can you already say when the decision will be taken on where the 2 new commands will be located? And second question, does Germany play a role in that decision?
So what we will decide tomorrow is the basis for further work, the outline, which then includes a command for the movement of military equipment forces and within Europe. I will not now be specific on exactly where such a command may be located, but I would say that Germany is central in Europe. That's at least what I can say. Then it's a process which is going on, and we will take more detailed decisions when we move into next year. And now we hope to agree on the outline, and then we have to make decisions also when we move into next year, and we will have a defense ministerial meeting in February, which I think will be very crucial for the further decisions on the more detailed decisions on the new NATO command structure.
Am I imagining things? He seems to have announced a policy, and then he seems to be unable to sort of discuss the policy in any detail.
Can't discuss it with however many 53 are. This man doesn't want to reveal information. And of course, the moment they start talking about the command and control centres, everybody can see that this is real.
Right. So the question is there a bit of deception going on here? And well, Let's have a look at this. This is the Northern Group Centre for Conceptual Thinking. What the heck is this, I wonder? This is taking place at the Defence Academy in the United Kingdom. It's hosted by the Development Concepts and Doctrine Centre, which is the UK's Ministry of Defence think tank, and it's headed by a 2-star officer. It's located in Shrivenham. It is under the UK's Joint Forces Command and reports to the Vice Chief of the Defence Staff on its priorities and so on. It used to be called the Joint Doctrine and Concept Centre. But anyway, this was their first meeting with Northern Group member states, including Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Latvia, Norway, Poland, Sweden, and the Netherlands. They were looking at various military scenarios. But why am I interested in this? Because this organisation has just issued recently, in the last couple of weeks, a call for papers on deception. What does it say? It says that the Development Concepts and Doctrine Centre, sorry, I've completely lost the track of this.
We've caught that.
We've caught Stoltenberg's bug, right? It's updating its thinking and doctrine in relation to military deception. DCDC understands deception as deliberate measures that manipulate the perception and condition the behaviour of a targeted decision maker. So this is about the Ministry of Defence getting involved in changing the minds of what? Leaders overseas, heads of state, other ministers of defence.
Well, as I remarked earlier, Mike, if you have a state of war existing where you've got clear boundaries, you have a nation state and you have an enemy, and that enemy state can be targeted. But when we are conducting military operations without a state of war being declared, then what are you going to do? Are you going to be unleashing deception measures on nation states that you're not at war with? That's a very interesting concept.
In order, they say, to achieve and exploit an advantage. And in the light of recent operational experience, they say the UK military has recognised the military deception activities have been neglected. Political, practical, social and ethical questions surround the planning and execution of deception activities today. This research project will examine the role, utility and desirability of conducting military deception activities, identify where conceptual and physical gaps in current UK capability exist, and suggest areas of development. Well, I would say that the UK's Ministry of Defence's capability for deception is extremely strong at the moment. Let's bring in the Foreign Affairs Council meeting, which is going to happen on Monday. And of course, if you look down through the agenda, which, by the way, this is an EU28 meeting, it's not an EU27 meeting, so the UK will be absolutely involved in this. And you look at the Security and Defence section, and there you go, they're looking at PESCO, but they're also looking at EU-NATO cooperation. So I'm going to say that the Russian representative who suggests that NATO's restructuring is all about Russia, no, I think Russia is a smokescreen, Brian, which is being used to cover up the fact that NATO is restructuring in order to deal with this new EU-NATO cooperation that Jens Stoltenberg and Mogherini have been planning for the last number of years.
Absolutely, Mike. Perhaps we give David some comment on this. It's pretty obvious to us, David, but we've been watching this for a long time. As we're going to see in a minute, other people are catching up. What's your thoughts?
Well, as we discovered last week, the mindset in the EU is not just defensive. And it's not simply a case of having military union for either internal political control or for cohesion. But they're looking outwards, they're looking to the neighbourhood, they're looking to the Middle East, they're looking to the Balkans, they're looking to the Ukraine, where they're going to take action if their interests or values are under threat. So we're going to be imposing, or Europe's going to be imposing their values on surrounding countries. So that's where we're going.
Well, if we look at the Foreign Affairs Council meeting again, it's interesting that they talk about security and defence. That's going to be an over-lunch meeting. EU cooperation on security and defence is an over-lunch meeting. In the margins of the Council, that's going to be permanent structured cooperation. That's going to happen in the margins of the Council. EU-NATO cooperation, well, that apparently is a formal meeting. But the other two are being presented as being informal meetings. And again, this is deceptive because what they're attempting to do is to present the idea that this isn't something which is central to their strategy.
This is just a little casual discussion.
But in the meantime, Brian, do we have to say we're delighted to see that Nigel Farage has finally
woken up? Is my expression.
Yes.
He's finally woken up. Apparently, he didn't know. He didn't know all this was going on. He was in the heart of the European Union, but he didn't know it was going on. But luckily, he's now woken up.
Well, that's good. So yesterday he was on LBC. That program is available to watch, and well, he said that he was shocked to discover. Basically,
he was.
I paraphrase slightly, but that's pretty much what he said.
Yeah, he was shocked to discover all of the information around PESCO. He didn't know, but he thinks that this is moving us towards. This is significant, Mike. He didn't use the phrase EU military unification, which is what it is. He's still talking in terms of an EU army. So Nigel Farage personally still going light on this subject, but we are extremely pleased that he's woken up. And it's very good to see Veterans for Britain has finally decided to actually stand up and be counted. And obviously a lot of people on the LBC network heard that.
Yep.
But we want to remind people here of the work of Veterans for Britain, because one of their key researchers, Dr. Lee Rotherham, was the man who said that a nation state that contracts out its defence has ceased to be. And this is telling us very clearly that if Britain continues under Theresa May down the route that Britain's military will be fully unified within the EU system, even despite Brexit, we cease to exist as a nation state. So Dr. Lee Rotherham from Veterans for Britain has got this right. We're going to say again, we're immensely curious that all of the great and good Tory grandees that are apparently there supporting Veterans for Britain, we've got David Jones, we've got Lord Lamont, we've got Theresa Villiers, David Davis, Jacob Rees-Mogg, very big man in the Bruges group, of course, Steve Baker, John Hayes MP, John Redwood. Wall of silence from these guys. So they've had to bring in UKIP in order to warn the 17 million people that voted to come out of the EU that something very nasty is happening. Why, Mike, do you think there is this wall of silence with these Conservative MPs?
Well, they're part of it.
They're part of it.
Yeah.
Okay, where does that take us? Well, let's have a think about dates. We spoke yesterday about this, the date set for the Westminster abuse hearings, and very curious that, as Mike's just said, we've now got, it's the same month has been chosen both to start the public part of the child abuse hearings and when we're leaving the European Union. And I thought that was an amazing coincidence.
Yes.
Because I've got a feeling that Brexit and the chaos that there's going to be will completely hide those Westminster hearings. And of course, this lady popped up in my mind, Jo Moore. This was the Labour Party aide to Stephen Byers, who at 2:55 p.m. on September the 11th, 2001, when millions of people were transfixed by the terrible television images of the terrorist attack, 9/11, said, "It is now a very good day to get out anything we want to bury. Councillors' expenses, question mark." And I want to add in here that this gives us a look into the moral culture of the heart of British politics. It's not just the Labour Party. This is dirty stuff. This is deceit. This is deceiving the public as to what the real policies are, Mike. So if it's possible over the death of thousands of people in that particular incident, it's still going on today. So we can say, let's have a look at the abuse inquiry, and they're in trouble because they've published another name of one of the alleged victims on the website.
This seems to be happening just a little bit too often, but it's not conspiracy. It's just cock up.
It's
Brian.
Just, excuse me. It's just cock up. I've put accident or design. Let's have a look at it. These are the words of the lady herself, Alexis J. In terms of the issue yesterday afternoon, we put up a notice of determination document whose title contained the name of an individual, The document itself had the name redacted. It was removed as soon as it was brought to our attention. The individual is being contacted and will be offered support. We understand that the document was viewed 5 times during the period. And then she goes on to say, we're reviewing our systems and practices and will be seeking advice to make sure we protect personal data as robustly as possible, blah, blah, blah. What she's really saying is, don't worry, the job's been done. The inquiry has released the details and abuse. The details, and abuse survivors will now be too frightened to come forward. So that's my take on it. Accident, I don't think so, because this has been happening too often. This was a earlier report from the Telegraph. We can go back into the Goddard section of the inquiry where data was being released. We've now got a repeat of it here. We had data released by this man, Keith Vaz, and we covered him yesterday, saying that despite the fact there's a video of him involved with rent boys and drugs, that the Parliamentary Standards Officer still having a little bit of a problem in seeing whether he might have done anything wrong. But this was the man on one of the crime committees, and they released details. So I've called this mechanics of child abuse cover-up. What are the mechanics? Introduce chaos, spin, leaks, and then you get the threats so that the abuse survivors don't want to come forward. What is it all about? It's about protecting this man. David, it's obvious what is going on in British Parliament, because of course when people realise that not only have we had MPs abusing children, but we've had the country run by a Prime Minister abusing children, all sorts of heads are going to fall in all sorts of places. And Scotland's not immune from this, of course.
Scotland's not immune. Scotland's further ahead. All this leaking information and betraying trust. This is old hat. This is amateur night. In Scotland, we do it much better. We do it officially. The way the system works in Scotland is, if you go to the Scottish inquiry and reveal that you've been a victim of childhood sexual abuse, you're immediately put on the vulnerable persons database with 815,000 other Scots. Now, what happens then is the police and social work are automatically notified. Many of these victims and survivors were abused by social workers in the care system, and their abusers are finding out. That sends a message.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, let's move on to Prevent. I would hope to cover this yesterday, but we ran out of time. Prevent and the Channel programme. Of course, the statistics for Prevent referrals were out yesterday, and 7,631 referrals in total, 2015 to 2016. 1,072 of those, were discussed at panel, and 381 of those cases received Channel programme support. Of those 7,631 referrals, 1,378 of them were aged between 15 and 20, and 1,504 of them were aged under the age of 15. So I believe it was somewhere in the region of 2,500 people under the age of 18, still children, were referred to this. Referrals relating to Islamist extremism concerns were 4,997 of those, which is 65%. Of course, they all went through the 381 of them went through the Channel programme. We can see how it works on screen at the moment. A referral is made. People are then given support and possibly mentoring support. I'm not quite sure what type of mentoring support that would be. But what's interesting about this, David, is, of course, taxi drivers have been involved in the training under the Prevent programme, which people have then expressed concerns about that. Taxi drivers being used by police to gather data and intelligence. But of course, one of the points to make about this is that it's not a police programme, it's a security services programme, Brian.
Yeah, this was, we spoke to a person yesterday with experience, direct experience of implementation of the Prevent programme. And one of the comments they made to us is that parents simply don't realise that when a child is flagged, they're not being flagged by the police, they're being directly flagged by the security services. And that flag on their character, on their record, on their state record, will never be removed,
But David, the use of taxi drivers as an intelligence gathering operation, this is something which we have seen with the named person scheme in Scotland.
Yes, exactly so. The idea there was that if you wanted a contract as a taxi driver to work for the local authority, you had to sign up to spy on what was happening in the back of your cab and report anything suspicious, however slight, however minor, to the named person who would gather all that information. So there was no escape from the state snoopers, because if you work even indirectly for the state, you're being co-opted into this system.
Yeah.
Prevent also came up. I was at a debate recently in Dundee, organised by a university there, talking about free speech and the limitations of it on free speech, and whether free speech is in fact alive and well in this country or very ill. And when the people who ran universities, the vice-chancellors and people of this level, started to speak about their experience, Prevent came up very quickly. And the Prevent strategy has been used as justification for preventing people speaking in centres of learning.
Yeah, a number of people in the chat box have picked up on this and said, scary. This is very scary stuff, because, of course, it forms a dictatorship like we have never seen before. Who's making the referrals is one question. Well, of course, school teachers are actually a big part of this, because they've been specifically visited by Prevent teams, told what to look out for in their classrooms, what children say, what they do, and they are then making the referrals through to the security services. And we will say many of these teachers just have no idea what's really behind it.
2,539 came from the education sector, so that's teacher referrals, yeah.
Indeed. So let's come in at this angle, and thank you very much to the viewer who pointed this article out. It's from Somerset County Gazette. And the headline is Caroline Ellis, Taunton Home Education responds to claims against homeschooling. And what is this to do with? Well, here we are. A Taunton educator has responded to claims that homeschooling is a breeding ground for extremism. And where does all this come from? Well, it comes from this gentleman, the Deputy Assistant Commissioner from the Met, Neil Basu. And he was warning a little while ago that unregulated and homeschooling in the UK was, quote, a breeding ground for extremism, unquote. So this is it. This sort of policeman, who was originally part of the Ghost Squad, supposedly investigating crimes by police officers, he's now moved across to this angle, and we're now fingering very small children and branding them as terrorists. But it gets worse, because in comes Ofsted, and I've described Matthew Kofi here, the chief of Ofsted, as a useful idiot. I think he is in this matter. He simply doesn't understand what he's playing with. But he's been warning that the government needs to crack down on homeschooling, as he believed it can be used as a loophole for parents to place their children in what he describes as unregistered settings. And he uses this language, the intelligence. I find that a very interesting phrase. The intelligence that we have found says there's a bit of a loophole and people are using it. The government needs to have a really long, serious, hard look at how it can close that loophole while maintaining everybody's right to educate children. There is the system. David, this is state spying on a scale which is truly horrific. And I will say once again for our viewers and listeners, this is not being run by the police. This is being run by the security services themselves. And I hope we'll be able to have a look in a bit more detail at this subject with Alex Thompson next week. But north of the border, the named person scheme was really the key in the lock to lock down children and families. We're not far behind south of the border.
And who was leading the fight against the named person scheme? Well, amongst others, it was the home educators. It was the homeschooling network. So this policeman who says that it's a breeding ground for extremism, well, I guess it depends what you define extremism as. Remember Cameron saying for too long we've been a passively tolerant society, saying to people, as long as you obey the law, we will leave you alone.
Yep.
Well, that is now, that belief, maybe that belief is extremist. Maybe the belief that you have the right to be left alone in this country is extremist. Maybe believing in liberty and educating your children as you see fit is extremist. So it's all about the words. I think words are moving, the definitions are moving, and I wonder, I'd be very interested to know what that particular policeman understands the word extremist to mean.
Indeed. Well, maybe it's as loosely defined as well-being is north of the border. More on that in due course. I'm just going to put this letter up on screen. People will be able to freeze the screen in order to read the full context. So I've said letter, it's an email. But basically, this is a UK column viewer warning of the oppression of disabled people. I found this a very, very interesting email. In it, it says this: the social model of understanding disability has given way to an extreme behaviouralist approach that is both inappropriate and life-threatening. And I would totally agree with this. We've seen a huge change. We've had years where everything has supposedly had to be done to help disabled people, and then suddenly it was like a switch turning, and really they were too much trouble. Benefits withdrawn. Don't come cringing to us that you've got problems and want more state handouts. So has this been an accidental drift in policy? I don't think so. I think it's been deliberate, but do have a read of that email. And yes, we will cover the subject in more detail.
Right, what's next? David, Stephen Sutherland, the BBC here reporting that a body has been found in the search for Stephen Sutherland. Just give us, just remind us about this story.
This is an older article from 2013. Now we've got an updated article coming out on the UK Column website in the next day or so. So I encourage people to look for that. Stephen went missing on the 6th and 7th September in 2013, and was discovered on a beach near his home on the 17th of the same month. And ever since, there's been a campaign for a proper inquiry, a campaign to have various facts fully examined. And there are many troubling aspects to this. Movement in the cause of death from the authorities. A determination, it would seem, to paint it as suicide from the very, very earliest stages of the inquiry, even though there was ample evidence that there might be much more to this, and a refusal to act in ways which seem, certainly to me, to be obvious in terms of a police investigation, gathering information, refusing to conduct forensic searches of places of interest for months after the events, and then finding evidence and essentially dismissing it. So the police seem to be acting as a brake on any sort of investigation, not driving it forward. So it's very interesting. The full story will be in this article to be published in the next day or so. It's called Stephen Sutherland, The Unanswered Questions. So I would encourage people to go and look at that. It has much broader implications for our safety in the society, for how the police are responding, for whether we can trust the police and Crown to enforce the law and to safeguard justice.
It's amazing, David, isn't it? We can brand 7-year-olds potential terrorists because they've said something, quote, inappropriate. But when it comes to investigating brutal murder of people, all of a sudden the police have got no power or capability to do it. Not an accidental policy, I don't think.
And David, the Sean Ritchie case, bring us up to date with that one.
Yes, this is a recent article from September this year. This is Carol Roy, who is Sean's mother, and the report here is that she's been handed a lifeline at Peterhead Sheriff Court. because of mental health problems, and she later posed as a stranger to send threats of violence to her own sister and to her family friend while trying to come to terms with the incident. So this is what she pled guilty to. And I've interviewed this lady, and I want to make it absolutely clear, I do not believe a word of that. I do not believe she did that. I believe she's been pressured into that admission because the police were threatening her with much more grievous action if she didn't plead guilty. I think she's been silenced. What's now happening is she's got an order which is she's going to be subject to a supervision order for 12 months, during which time she must undertake any counselling that is suggested by her local social workers. Wow. So there'll be no campaigning for that lady for justice for at least 12 months. This will effectively silence her, and I suspect the rest of her family as well. I find this extremely troubling.
So we could say she must accept state re-education. Let's put it in a different language.
Indeed, that's exactly it. Yes, she must comply with everything they suggest, or the full weight of the law will bear down on her once again.
Well, let's have a look at the Scottish Children's Minister. Mark MacDonald has had to resign over a text message. It wasn't really a text message, it was a little bit more graphic than that, wasn't it?
Well, we don't really know because it's been very secretively done, and there's one text message, but there's multiple women being discussed, so I suspect there were many text messages, and there's some suggesting that there might have been some photographic material in there. We don't know. We're trying to find out, but there's essentially silence from the Scottish government.
A bit of embarrassment from the Scottish government that the Children's Minister should have been caught, figuratively speaking, with his pants down.
This is the Children's Minister. This is the man who's responsible for named person. This is the man, although he's been absolutely silent and completely invisible since getting the post, this is the man most directly responsible for saying to every Scottish parent, you cannot be trusted. We're not sure that you'll bring up your children correctly. The state requires to put an overseer to make sure that you're not letting the side down, you're not letting your children down. We know best. And he's sending inappropriate text to young ladies who are not his wife. It's telling.
But one of the women who received, according to this Daily Record article, they describe it as sleazy texts, hits out at Shane Minister over his resignation statement.
Yes, the resignation statement was, well, I was being funny and jovial and joking, and I now realise that some people might have not perceived it that way. That would be what's termed in the business, I think, a lie. I think from the reaction from this particular lady who received this communication, she's quite clear there was only one way to interpret that, and that the resignation statement was less than honest.
But Nippy doesn't believe it was enough for him to have resigned.
Well, he's got to step down as Children's Minister because you don't really want him supervising your 3-year-old, but it's okay to be an MSP. He's fine to be an MSP. He didn't show up to his constituency surgery to actually meet anybody, and he's disappeared from Twitter and social media and is rather invisible, but he's still fine to be an MSP, and he's planning his political comeback, so that's good news. He is incidentally a political placeman, never had a proper job, worked in politics all of his life. He is the new model politician.
There's a big difference here from the Welsh take on this sort of thing, isn't there? Because we had the member of the Welsh Parliament that was suspended. He didn't know what he'd been accused of, but was suspended, and then I think it's now been stated he committed suicide. But tragic. So we seem to have a draconian party system in Wales, but north of the border, well, you can do this stuff as long as we don't give you a job that involves children.
I think as long as you tell the whips so that they can take action and make sure you owe them a favour.
Thank you. Can I just ask a question? And that is that is the whipping system then evident in the Scottish Parliament as well?
That's a very good question, actually. The discipline is evident, particularly in the SNP. How they actually generate that discipline is less than clear.
Okay, and what's the Scottish Review saying about this?
Well, they're pointing out that the name person mess is a bit of a metaphor for what's happened here. His last action as a minister was to go and launch another version of Lanarkshire's attempt to get children involved in name person and well-being issues from a very young age, and to encourage those children to develop their own understanding of what well-being is, even though the actual government can't define it. But they're going to have Sid and Shinari, two cartoon characters here. Sid is the bear, I think, and Shinari's the spider, or maybe it's the other way about. And they have adventures in the well-being wood, and sometimes you go deep into the well-being wood, and there's traps for the unwary. And if you travel too far too soon, you risk getting hopelessly lost. And it seems that the always excellent Kenneth Roy thought that was, in fact, a bit of a metaphor for how the Scottish Government have been proceeding along this name person route.
And what do we know about the new Children's Minister in Scotland, Marie Todd?
Well, very little. She's completely new. She was elected in 2016 as a list MSP, so she's kind of the lowest of the low, the newest of the new, no experience at all. Now, she had a proper job before becoming an MSP. She seems a very nice lady. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with her. She was a pharmacist. She's had a career. But in terms of political standing, she's one step above kind of T-Boy. And she's now got to head up this policy. Now, the last person, Mr. MacDonald, really didn't do anything, and it was all done by the always intimidating Mr. Swinney, who gets very angry if you resist the name person policy. He does tend to get lose his temper quite quickly on this, and doesn't like people interrupting or giving views. So he's going to be taking the lead, and I suspect Ms. Todd will not actually have very much to do, and that's maybe just as well because she's really very inexperienced.
This seems to be the thread. We've got an inexperienced person now as Defence Secretary. We've got an inexperienced person. We've just lost an inexperienced person as Overseas Development Minister, and it seems we've got another inexperienced person in the job now. So this seems to be the trend at the moment.
Easily mentored is the word. The mentor comes alongside them, the personal advisor, and of course behind them is the whipping system. This is how it's done.
Okay, David, let's move on. Now, this story, I think, was from 6 years ago. The headline in The Guardian was Chronic Fatigue Syndrome Researchers Face Death Threats from Militants.
Death threats. Oh, yes, these terrible militant ME sufferers. Yes, here's poor old grandfatherly looking Mr. Wesley, and he says in this article in The Guardian are very sympathetic, that the hassle, the harassment, the threats that he has had from ME sufferers have been so severe that he's going to change career. He's going to look at Gulf War Syndrome, another disease he doesn't believe is real, and he's going to go out to Afghanistan because he feels safer in Afghanistan than he does in Britain amongst the parents of the children with ME who he has treated. So that was the story, and we've got this thing now called the Freedom of Information Act. And that's a very handy thing because you can ask questions and eventually you can force answers out of these institutions.
Sometimes it takes a while.
So it does. So this theme of terrible intimidation by the great British public of the gallant ME researchers who are only there to trying to help was picked up by Esther Crawley, another of the ME researchers, and she was quite vocal about this. And she works at Bristol University, and it transpires that there were no reports to this university of any harassment of anyone whatsoever. Zero. So what you've actually got is no harassment, but people asking polite, well-reasoned questions. And that is being described by the researchers who have a political axe to grind as harassment. We've even seen them describe a baroness asking a question in the House of Lords as harassment of a researcher. Quite outstanding.
Okay, and this is possibly another outstanding story as well. Who are Harvey Weinstein's army of spies?
Well, they're it's called Black Cube, and they are ex-Mossad, and they're really very good. I encourage people to go and have a little look at their website. If you want to intimidate people, they're excellent. Their advisory board is so good that their honorary president is still on their advisory board, even though he's been dead since 2012. But he's still on their website. The late Mia Dagan, one of the most illustrious and successful directors of the Mossad, 2002 to 2012, a post which she was appointed to by Prime Minister Ariel Sharon. So it's all ex-IDF and Mossad agents, and they will work for you and they will spy for you, and they will, it would appear, pretend to be other people, and win and betray the confidence of people that you might have sexually assaulted or raped in order to suppress that story.
But basically Weinstein has been using this lot to track down his accusers, is that right?
Track down his accusers, find out what they know, win their confidence, try to get dirt on them, anything that can be used to pressure people into keeping silent, anything that can be used to discredit them if they speak out. Very dirty, profoundly dirty.
David, I can't really see what the problem is. The political charity Common Purpose collected data, which it wasn't entitled to, from local authorities on anybody who was submitting a Freedom of Information request asking how much public money had been spent on Common Purpose. And it ultimately took the Information Commissioner to give them a slap over the wrist. But that was a political charity was able to do that. So if we take it through to people who have higher up the establishment order, I think it's only appropriate that they should be able to call on the full resources to make sure that there's no accusations against them.
Well, full resources of Mossad, if you can afford the fee, they will be there, and I'm sure they're very effective in their own ways. Suppressing stories seems to be just one of their talents.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, I'm just going to pop up on screen here a cartoon that was produced for the UK column many years ago. And I believe that this is still an extremely powerful cartoon. Hopefully you'll freeze the screen and you can consider it at your leisure. But essentially we've got the UK with all sorts of events happening. We've got bent politicians, we've got treason, we've got political correctness, chaos, regional development agencies, bent judiciary, fraud, regional assemblies, perverted sexual education, anti-Christian sentiment. That's all going on, and it is going on, and it's increasingly going on. And the person who produced this cartoon put a cloud over the country. That's the smoke screen. And what we're really doing on UK Column, and we encourage all of our viewers and listeners to do, is to research who the people are pulling the strings above that cloud. The cartoon suggests, of course, that everything comes back to those who've got the money. We must look at the international banking system, the Bank of International Settlements, how money is pushed around the European Union. But the person indicated quite clearly what was coming was a dictatorship, and I think they were absolutely spot on. David, thank you very much for joining us. And I'd say once again, thank you to all the people north of the border who've done such great work countering the named person scheme. That's been really excellent. And of course, we've also got the campaign now against child abuse, which is taking off. Can you give us an update on that very quickly in the last minute?
Well, we're getting underway with research. We're getting underway with fundraising. We'll be starting the meetings all around Scotland, commencing from March next year. It's all going ahead. It's very positive, and we'll make a difference.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's it from UK Column today. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider taking out a subscription and or making a donation, because we can only do what we do with your help and support. And as we are regularly saying now, we would like to expand the news reporting that we do. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back on Monday. That will be Mike Robinson. I'll see viewers again on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.